Hi, hello my dear friends. I am Vivek P, TGT English at Sainik School, Kazhakootam. So let us have a quick look at the title of the very first lesson for class 11 English, The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. Well, in the former session, we discussed Khushwant Singh in detail and we saw his life sketch, the contributions that Khushwant Singh had made towards the world of literature in general and Indian English writing in particular. So today we will go through the lesson in detail. As I told you, this happens to be the very first lesson for class 11 English. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. This is the first paragraph of The Portrait of a Lady written by Khushwant Singh. I would like to remind you something that we discussed in the other session. That is, The Portrait of a Lady is a personal narrative. It is a personal note, or it could be called as an autobiographical narrative written by Khushwant Singh. It is all about his relationship with his grandmother. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. So whenever we think about the word grandmother or grandfather, the image that would definitely strike us is someone very old. A grandmother or a grandfather can never be young. Okay, that is a common notion that everybody keeps in their minds. Right, so my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. So here Khushwant Singh is explaining more about his association with his grandmother for nearly 20 years, the association that he had with her. Right. So she had been old and wrinkled. She had been old and wrinkled. So as I told you, forming wrinkles on someone's face, having wrinkles on the face of someone is an attribute, right? Is a feature that we commonly see among whom grandparents or people who are so old. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband. Okay, but that was hard to believe. So here Khushwant Singh is sharing some information regarding something that he finds a bit difficult to believe, a bit difficult to accept. And what is that? His grandmother being young and pretty many years ago. Okay, so that information was very, very strange. He felt very uneasy upon hearing the same, that she used to be young and pretty in her past, because to Khushwant Singh, his grandmother is always old. It is that image that he has in his memory, not any other image. So hearing that she used to be old in the past, hearing that she used to be young in the past, it was pretty difficult for him to digest and accept. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. So here there is some reference made towards whom grandfather, whose portrait was hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. So grandfather's portrait is a kind of painting, pretty big enough. Okay, so it was hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. What could be mantelpiece? Mantelpiece, as I told you, it is a kind of structure. It is a kind of structure made of wood or even stone, okay, around a fireplace. So since Khushwant Singh lived in the north of India, we know during winter season, north of India, it would be pretty cold. Okay, So, to face such kind of situation, they had mantelpiece constructed. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest and he looked 100 years old. A description of how his grandfather appeared on that portrait. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could have only lots and lots of grandchildren. That is again an assumption that Khushwant Singh makes about his grandfather. From that photograph, from that painting, what he felt, that is what we see described here. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. He would never have children. He would neither have children or a wife, whereas an appearance was noticeable, that was that he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. Now you can see the thought was almost revolting, that particular clause highlighted here. Why is it so? Because something was almost revolting, something was almost difficult to accept, something was almost difficult to believe, and that was nothing else. And for my grandmother being young and pretty, and for my grandmother to be young and pretty was really difficult as far as Khushwant Singh was concerned. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now again Khushwant Singh is getting confused upon hearing that his grandmother used to play when she was a child, and to him it was almost something absurd. Absurd means totally illogical, something that we cannot accept at all. Okay. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified. Undignified here means disrespectful, something that lacks respect on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Fables, again, you know, those are stories which have some morals in it. Okay, such stories are called fables, and he thought that those were just fables which she used to share with him, which she used to tell him when he was a child, when he was a small child. Okay, so the fables of the prophets she used to tell us, and prophets are none other than saints. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. As I told you, being so old, we can understand how her appearance would be. Okay, she had many wrinkles, and that too which ran from everywhere to everywhere. So throughout her face there were umpteen wrinkles. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. So that is again Khushwant Singh reiterating a kind of thought that he used to have then. We were certain she had always been as we had known her. So to him she could never be young and pretty, something that we have already seen in the first paragraph. Okay, so that thought he finds it very difficult to accept. So we were certain she had always been as we had known her, that is old. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, she could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Right, again she hobbled about. The movement, the way she walked, she could just hobble. Hobble is a kind of awkward movement or awkward way of walk that we make. Probably it is out of a severe pain that that person experiences. I have a picture to substantiate what hobble is. It is a movement word. This is what hobble is. That is walk in an awkward way, typically because of pain from an injury. So we don't know whether she has met with any accident or that accident has developed into a kind of severe pain, the result of that accident. We don't know. But anyhow, maybe because she was pretty old, she had to hobble. So she hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Okay, so here that's how she appeared to be in the house. Being so old, she had to hobble around the house. About the house means hobbling around the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist. On her waist, one hand would be resting on her waist, and she would walk like this. So pretty old enough. Okay, she would walk like that. And on the other hand, what did she have? She used to have that beads of her rosary, which she used to chant. She used to pray using the beads of rosary. I have one picture to substantiate what beads of rosary is. So here we have beads of rosary. Okay, this is what she used to have in her one hand, and the other hand would be resting there on her waist. That's how she was mostly seen in the house. Right. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. She is also considered to be, she is also called as an expanse of pure white serenity for the fact she used to wear a white dress, and she used to have white hair, which symbolize or which shows that she was very old. Breathing peace and contentment. She was a person who stood for peace, and as a result of that, she also had a very satisfying life too. Okay, so that last part, her silver locks were scattered. Silver locks here references made towards what made her hair. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayers. Every now and then she used to have this prayer in her tongue. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. She was like, again, that is a kind of expression, a kind of simile expression we can see, where she has been compared to what? A winter landscape in the mountains. An expanse of pure white serenity, a metaphorical expression we can see here, calling herself as what? An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Wherever she used to be, she was someone who gives a kind of relief and peace to others. Okay, that is what another description that we have about this grandmother. So my grandmother and I were good friends. The writer, the narrator, the author, Gushwant Singh, and his grandfather were very good friends. His parents had left him with her when they had gone to live in the city, and they were constantly together. So that is how this kind of a very strong relationship gets developed between Gushwant Singh and his grandmother. His parents had left him with her when they had gone to the city, and both of them were constantly together, both Gushwant Singh and his grandmother. We can see here the author lived with her in the village. They were good friends. His parents left him with her to settle in the city. And the author's grandmother used to wake him up every morning and get him ready for school. She would recite her morning prayers while she bathed and dressed him up, and he loved her voice but would not try to memorize a word of what she spoke. Now, here we have it. She used to wake him up in the morning and get me ready for school. That is something that every one of us would cherish forever. The relationship or the associations that we had with our grandparents. That is something we do cherish forever. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. Monotonous. What do you mean by monotonous? Monotonous means dull or boring. We have the meaning here. Monotonous means dull and boring. So what is considered to be dull and boring here? The morning prayer that she used to recite. Okay, it was pretty boring and very dull as far as Gushwant Singh was concerned, but of course he did listen to it just because he loved her voice very much. Okay, so probably she might have been chanting, or she might have been reciting with a kind of thought that one fine day Gushwant Singh would learn all this. One fine day everything would be mugged up by who? Mugged up by her grandson Gushwant Singh. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. Okay, after that what she would do is that she would go and get the slate meant for whom, meant for Kushwant Singh, and the other yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. So it was her, it was his grandmother who used to get him ready for school. Okay, she was the person who stood by Kushwant Singh during those days. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. So that was the usual ordinary breakfast they had those days. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs as well, for the village, probably for the stray dogs. She used to carry what? She used to keep some stale chapatis meant for those dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. So it is pretty obvious. The school is attached to the temple, and she, being someone who upheld temples and such religions, such beliefs, used to accompany him. Okay. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in the rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayers in a chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapati we threw to them. So this is something that we see getting developed, a kind of strong, deep relationship between whom grandmother and Kushwant Singh. Grandmother accompanying her grandson to his school, and the school was attached to the temple, and where the priest taught them the alphabet and the morning prayer. Okay. While that was in progress, what did the grandmother do then? Okay, she used to sit inside reading the scriptures. While her grandson was busy attending school or studying, she used to sit inside reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door, and of course the grandmother carried something very special for the village dogs. It was nothing other than what? Nothing other than stale chapatis for them. Probably there might have not been any other person who could feed these village dogs. Probably they might have been ignored by others. Okay, so that might be the reason. Anyhow, she found some kind of happiness. She found it as a great act. Okay, helping those animals. So when we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling. Growling means that sound made by them, okay, and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. So among them, among the dogs, there might be a kind of squabble, there might be a kind of fight going on for the chapatis given by whom? Given by the grandmother, right? Okay. So when my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. Now we see a kind of change taking place in both their lives. Okay. Earlier in the village phase, we can call it the village phase, the very first phase of Kushwant Singh's life as a child, we could see the relationship getting developed between whom? His grandmother and him. Okay, right now they have moved to city, and that is what here he calls as a turning point. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. They sent for both of us. Okay, that was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. Okay, a kind of practice she used to have in the past, a kind of practice that she used to maintain when both of them were in village. Let us see what the reason is. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. So that is the reason. The school might be located a bit far away, and he used to go to a school which taught English, okay, which helped them learn English, and he went by a motor bus. So there was no need of a person to accompany, because he was taken in the school bus itself. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. Now here, no more stray dogs could be seen because all those dogs were in the village. Here there were no dogs. Instead she started finding time to feed home sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. That is what, there were no dogs on the street and she took to feeding. You see here, she took to feeding. That way of expressing take, the word take is used as what, a kind of new habit getting developed in whom, in the grandmother. She started feeding the sparrows who came in the courtyard of their city house. So there is a change taking place, as I told you, from village now we have reached city. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. For some time she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots and the beggars and not meant for gentle folk. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. Now we see that change taking place here, that transition, that transformation, village phase getting changed to city phase, or village life getting changed to city life. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other, and the interesting part is that both of them stayed together, but still seeing each other started going down, or the frequency of the same is now going down. For some time she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school, as something that happened in their former time and when they were in the village. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. Okay, so for a few days she used to wake him up as she used to do while both of them were in the village. And when he was back from school, she would definitely ask, "Ray, how was your school today? Did you enjoy? What did you learn today?" Likewise, such queries were asked by her. So to all those queries, poor Kushwan had nothing else other than saying what he had experienced those days. So he would say, "Today I learned English words and little things of science. Okay, I learned this, I learned English words." So that was really unacceptable to whom? To the grandmother, because she never knew what they were, because she always stood for scriptures and other religious teachings. So here this made her unhappy. The content, the lessons her grandson studied, or the lessons her grandson was taught in the school, really made her upset and disappointed. Okay, she was so unhappy, she was in distress. She could not help him with lessons because she never knew what was taught there in the school. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed, and there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. Later she was also she also came to know that nothing about God and scriptures were taught in the school. So she could not help him anymore. One day Kushwant announced that they were being the students of her school, and he himself were given music lessons. Upon hearing music lessons, she really got stunned. She was so surprised. In fact, she got shocked because she was so disturbed, and the fact behind that was very simple, because to her always music had some lewd associations. Okay, to her music had lewd associations. Lewd association means something very obscene, something that we cannot accept, something that is considered to be a taboo in the society. Okay, so she found, or she could find lewd associations for whom? For music. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentlefolk. To her, music was the cup of tea of whom? Cup of tea is an idiom. Okay, music was meant only for harlots. Harlots means prostitutes and beggars, and not meant for gentle folk. Okay, for people from gentle family, people from good and reputed family were not supposed to learn music as far as Khushwant Singh's grandmother was concerned. She said nothing but her silence meant disapproval. Okay, though she didn't say all this to whom? To Khushwant Singh, that silence spoke a lot about her disapproval. Okay, that silence meant nothing else other than disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. And of course, all these experiences, all this latest changes might have really upset, might have really worried whom? The grandmother. Okay, so slowly and steadily changes are taking place in the life of Khushwant Singh. Here he goes to university. When I went to university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of friendship was snapped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little pieces or little bits, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Some came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders, some even sat on her head. She smiled, but never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest hour of the day for her. Now here, as I told you, slowly and steadily life is changing, not just to whom? Not just to Khushwant Singh, even to his grandmother as well. Here he is making a leap in his life. From village he came to city. Now from city he is going to university. Okay, he was given a room of his own. So that marks the, what do we say, that connection is getting lost here. The common link of friendship was snapped. Snap means broken. Okay, when we break a pencil into two pieces, we can say the pencil has got snapped. Okay, so the connection is getting lost. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. So she accepted her isolation. Though she was there in the house, other members were also there, but she started realizing some kind of seclusion or isolation in that life or in that house. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. So most of the time she would be busy spinning the wheel over there, and of course it is pre-independence time. So you know the importance of spinning wheel. Okay. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. And that too, a kind of practice she used to have when she was in village. She used to feed whom? The stray dogs, the village dogs there. Now here she is not going out of the house. Okay, so here dogs are not there, no, dogs are not seen by her, but whereas we have sparrows there. Okay, a new habit that she has started practicing. While she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Veritable means not so important or something very, very strange. And bedlam is what? A kind of confusion. Okay, so when the birds realize that somebody is feeding them something, they thought of coming together and creating a kind of havoc or a confusion there. Some of the sparrows came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders, some even sat on her head. She smiled but never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. Okay, so a kind of relationship is getting developed between the sparrows, between the birds and the grandmother. Now when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age one could never tell. But my grandmother could. She was not even sentimental. She came to leave me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. Now from his university life, he had returned home, and from then he is going abroad for further studies, for higher studies he is going abroad. So he was very sure that his grandmother would be so upset. I would be away for nearly 5 years. Okay, Khushwant Singh himself is saying that he would be away for 5 years, and at her age we could never tell her that he was going abroad. But she accepted it readily. Okay, so that is what we come to know from this, that she was someone very, very practical. So his grandmother could, she was not even sentimental, she came to leave me at the railway station. She showed that courage to even see him off at the railway station. Okay, and she didn't show any particular emotion regarding that, and she was seen in her common way, how she used to be chanting her prayers, reciting the prayers in an inaudible manner. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Okay, silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint. Okay, later she is kissing her grandson, and the moist that was left as a result of that kiss, that imprint, moist imprint, as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. That is the author saying it, that might be the last contact, the last physical contact that he would have with her. Okay, because he would be back only after 5 years, and she is very old now, so he might have thought like that. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. Now here, after 5 years, the author was returning home, and there has not been any change for whom? For his grandmother. She has been the same. No change has undergone in her. Okay, she did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, while she hugged me in her arms, she was still heard reciting or chanting prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. So that habit she had cultivated upon reaching the city was still there. She had been continuing the same, feeding the sparrows. So even on the very first day of his arrival, after earning a degree from another foreign country, the very first day she remained the same. That means she was all contented. She was very, what do we say, I would say very consistent. Even she was not ready to give up, she was not ready to show over emotion, everything, but she remained the same. Okay, very contented she was, feeding her sparrows with frivolous rebukes. Frivolous rebukes here refers to what? Frivolous means not that important. Rebuke is a kind of scolding that we make, okay, when we are angry with someone. So maybe with the sparrows she might have been seen scolding them for the way they were carrying out themselves, because she was feeding them. She might have given some grain, she might have given some bread bits, something like that. Bread crumbs might have been given to them. In between, the way they were eating, the way they were taking, she might have got a bit upset, and she was scolding them. She was scolding the sparrows, but that was not so important, so serious. That is why frivolous rebukes. Frivolous means something very petty, silly, trivial, and rebuke is the way we scold someone. Rebukes means when we scold. Okay. So that is the meaning of that paragraph. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. So something very strange is happening here in the life of the grandmother. Maybe for the first time she skipped praying. Okay. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. Okay, that was something very drastic, something very uncommon and strange as far as the grandmother was concerned. She collected the women of the neighborhood. Okay, she went around and collected mainly women. A few women were collected by her, and she got an old drum and started to sing. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. Sagging skins means almost the worn out drum it was, the skin of the drum, and that too dilapidated drum. Dilapidated drum is a drum that has undergone a severe damage, or it is almost at the verge of getting fully damaged or destroyed. Okay, so it's a worn out drum it was, and she sang of what? Sang of the homecoming of warriors, the return of great soldiers or warriors. So that means keeping them in her memory. She started singing, praising them, the warriors who were yet to return. We had to persuade, we had to force her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. The next morning, she was taken ill. She was found ill. Okay. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was almost near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So she was found ill. She was taken to a doctor, and the doctor told us that it's okay, no problem, nothing to worry. It would go, the fever would go. But my grandmother, his grandmother, took it in a different way. She started saying that her end was almost near and she would pass away at any moment. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She had omitted, she has decided not to. She had exempted praying. So she was of the view that maybe because she had omitted to pray, it might be a kind of punishment from His Almighty. Since she had omitted to pray, she was almost at the verge of dying. That was her perception, that was her thought going on then. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. We protested, but she ignored our protests. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. Still she was with her beads of rosary. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. So that marks the end of the life of the grandmother of Khushwant Singh. We protested to what she had told us, that she was almost at the verge of dying. That is what we are protesting here. But she ignored our protests. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, okay, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Even before we could finalize, or even before we could just suspect or have a kind of doubt that whether she was alive or not, she had made it very sure that she was no more. Her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers, something that she used to hold for her whole life. Throughout her life, she was described as someone who had been holding beads of rosary. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. A peaceful pallor, pallor means a kind of change on her face. We have the meaning here, pallor is here, an unhealthy pale appearance. Okay, an unhealthy pale appearance. We lifted her off the bed, and as is customary, as it is a custom, we lifted her off the bed and as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. Red shroud means a red kind of shawl or a kind of cloth was covered, was wrapped. After a few hours of mourning, mourning means after a few hours of crying, lamenting, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. She had to be cremated. That used to be the custom, that still used to be the custom among the Sikhs. The sun was setting and had left her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. So this is just something happening immediately after her death. Okay, she had to be cremated, that ritual had to be done. For that, all of them were getting ready. That time the sun was setting and had lit her room and the veranda with a blaze of golden light. Blaze means a bright flame was seen. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. At that point of time, when she was taken, something very obvious, something very noticeable was that the presence of too many sparrows, and that too thousands of sparrows, they were seen scattered on the floor. There was no chirping. Earlier it used to be what? Veritable bedlam of chirping. A kind of strange confusion shown among the sparrows. Now there was no confusion, there was no sound, there was no chirps made by them. We felt sorry for the birds and my mother fetched some bread for them. So this is very touching, this is very emotional, because all those sparrows used to be fed by whom? Fed by the person who is now no more. She broke into little crumbs. The mother, the writer's, the author's mother broke the bread into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them and threw it to the sparrows. Okay, the sparrows took no notice of the bread. Of course, they have come and assembled not for what? Not for eating, not for being fed. Instead, they wanted to just be with their with that person who had taken care of them for many years. Okay, so they wanted to spend some time with that dead soul. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, when we carried my grandmother's dead body off, they flew away quietly. All the sparrows flew away quietly. So they had come to know that the person who had been feeding them was no more. They came, they took a part in it, and they later flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. The next morning, the sweeper came and swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. So that shows what? They were very upset. They were so down. They were so sorrowful. They could not even take even a single crumb given by the author's mother. In fact, they had come and been a part of this not for breadcrumbs. Instead, they want to express their sorrow and sadness upon the death of someone who had really taken care of them, someone who had really lived for them. That marks the end of the life of Khushwant Singh's grandmother and the end of our first lesson as well. The Portrait of a Lady, as I told you, it is an autobiographical narrative, an autobiographical account sharing Khushwant Singh's associations with his grandmother and how that grandmother evolved as someone very, very significant and someone very crucial in the life of the author, right? So you can attempt the textual questions at your convenience. At your ease, you can do. The materials are uploaded on Google Drive as well, right? Okay, so get the work done. Have a silent reading of the lesson at least twice or thrice. You will be able to go into the depth of the lesson. You will be able to connect with many life experiences that you have had so far, right? So I'll take leave now. Thank you everybody.